DNA expertise has helped in the investigation of crimes more than once. But sometimes happen absolutely incredible cases like this story. While investigating one case, the police accidentally learned a dirty secret of a local resident, which he managed to hide for many years. I recommend watching this video until the end. No one expected such a denouement. UK, Kent. Tunbridge Wells is located 50 kilometers from London. Its population is approximately 60,000 people. It was a quiet city where high-profile crimes never happened, but everything changed in 1987. 25-year-old Wendy Nell moved to Tunbridge Wells after the divorce and settled in an apartment on Guildford Road. She wanted to start a new life. The girl got a job at the photo studio Supersnaps and soon started a new relationship with Ian Plass. Wendy was glad that her life was finally starting to improve, but happiness didn't last long. On June 22, 1987, after work, Wendy went on a date with Ian. They had a great evening, after which, at about 11 o'clock, the guy drove her home. The next day, Wendy didn't show up for work. She didn't answer on the phone calls. Her boss sounded the alarm because this had never happened before. He contacted Wendy's mother, who called Ian and asked him to go to her daughter's house to check on her. Literally half an hour later, the guy was standing on the threshold of Wendy's apartment. He knocked on the door for a long time, but no one opened. Then Ian decided to look into the apartment through the windows and saw that the girl was lying on the bed in the bedroom. He called out Wendy's name and pounded on the window, but the girl didn't respond. The window was old and, as Ian said, unreliable. He was able to open it and get into the bedroom. Then he saw a terrible picture. Wendy's lifeless, naked body lay on the bloodied bed. Later, an examination showed that the girl had been beaten, raped and strangled. Despite the fact that the house had rather thin walls, the neighbors said they didn't hear anything. While examining the crime scene, the police found two pieces of evidence: a bloody fingerprint on a grocery bag and a shoe print on the cuff of Wendy's blouse. In addition, the girl's personal diary and the key to the front door disappeared from the apartment. 5 months later, there was another murder. Caroline Pierce, 20, lived in Grosvenor Park and worked as a manager at Buster Brown's. On November 24, after her shift, she returned home by taxi, but she never entered the apartment. Caroline was attacked near the front door. This time, the neighbors heard two loud screams, but they quickly subsided, so no one attached any importance to this. The search for Caroline began the next day when she didn't show up for work. Her body was found 3 weeks later, on December 15. It lay in a flooded drainage ditch on farmland in Romney Marsh. This place is 40 kilometers from Caroline's house. The body was discovered by a tractor driver who was working in the field at that day. Caroline was wearing only pantyhose. Later, forensics found traces of sperm on them. Caroline, like Wendy, was beaten, raped and strangled. The clothes and all the things that were with her on November 24 were gone. The police assumed that the killer took them with him. The injuries on Wendy and Caroline's bodies were similar, so detectives assumed both murders were committed by the same person. Unfortunately, at that time, genetic expertise was just beginning to develop. At that time, there was no unified database of DNA profiles of criminals. She appeared in the 90s. Therefore, the investigation into the Wendy and Caroline cases dragged on for 30 years. As genetic engineering has developed, new methods have emerged for the study of biomaterials, including old or damaged samples. It also became possible to determine the so-called related or family DNA. Thanks to this, it is now possible to determine whether someone is related to a person whose DNA was found at the crime scene and entered into a single database. The new DNA analysis method is very complex and expensive, but the detectives were confident that it would help find the killer of Wendy and Caroline. Therefore, the department allocated the necessary amount of money for all events. In total, the investigation of Wendy and Caroline's cases cost £2.5 million. Initially, the number of suspects was about 1,000 people. Thanks to DNA analysis, this number has been reduced by more than 10 times. 90 matches were found in the database. Each person on this list had some degree of relationship to Wendy and Caroline's killer. Detectives visited all the people on this list and took fresh DNA samples from them. In 2020, there was a long-awaited breakthrough in the investigation. One of the biomaterial samples showed a high probability of being related to the killer. Its owner turned out to be a certain Mr. Fuller. The man's name and information about the crime he committed have not been released. Detectives studied the genetic tree of Mr. Fuller and found out that his brother David Fuller lived in Tunbridge Wells in the 80s, on the same street that Wendy later moved to. But the man didn't live there long. Together with his wife and teenage son, he moved to East Sussex, to the small town of Heathfield, which is located just 26 kilometers from Tunbridge Wells. In November 2020, detectives visited David to take biomaterial from him for DNA analysis, and also ask if he knew anything about the murder of Wendy and Caroline. David replied that he knew nothing about those crimes, but kindly provided his biomaterial. While the detectives were waiting for the result of the DNA examination, they didn't waste time and made inquiries about the new suspect. David Fuller was 67 years old. He led a calm, measured life and worked as an electrician in a district hospital. Everyone spoke positively about him and believed that his only drawback was his amorousness. David had numerous affairs and was also married 3 times and had 4 children. During his school years, David had problems with the police. He committed arson and stole bicycles. By the age of 20, David had learned to pick door locks. Between 1973 and 1977 he committed a number of burglaries. The police managed to catch him and bring him to justice, but the guy managed to avoid a real prison term. With age, David settled down and found new hobbies. One of which was photography. David was briefly the unofficial photographer for London-based rock band Cutting Crew, and in 1985 even accompanied them on tour with his second wife. Another hobby of David was cycling. He was a member of a cycling club for a long time, and during his trips he took a lot of photos. By education, David was an electrician, and quite a good one. He briefly worked in the Portsmouth Navy. But in 1989 he moved to Kent, and began working as an electrician in a hospital in Kent and Sussex. It closed in 2011 and workers, including David, were transferred to the new Tunbridge Wells District Hospital in the nearby village of Pembury. He continued to work there until he retired. On December 3, 2020, the police again came to David Fuller's house, but this time to arrest him. Genetic analysis showed that David's biomaterial completely matches the sperm DNA found on Caroline Pierce's pantyhose. During interrogation, David denied involvement in the murder of girls. He said that he didn't know them and had never even seen them. Also, according to David, he even knew the city of Tunbridge Wells itself poorly, and was there extremely rarely on business. This was an outright lie. The detectives already knew that David had lived in Tunbridge Wells for some time. To prove David's involvement in Wendy's murder, detectives compared his fingerprints with those found on a grocery bag in the girl's apartment. The match turned out to be incomplete, since the found print was slightly smeared. The detectives needed more solid evidence, so they got a warrant to search David's house. They hoped to find keys and Wendy's personal diary, which disappeared from the girl's apartment on the night of the murder. The detectives could not have imagined that they would discover something more and reveal the terrible secret of a humble electrician. David had a private office in the attic. That's where the police started their search. The room was littered with a huge amount of things, including old computers, 100 hard drives, 1,300 DVDs and CDs, 2,200 floppy disks, 30 mobile phones and SIM cards, 34,000 printed photographs and many photographic films. Most of the discovered equipment and information carriers lay in plain sight, but some things were securely hidden. For example, 4 hard drives were attached to the back wall of the nightstand, which was found in the closet. Among the important finds were numerous diaries of David. As it turned out, he led them for 30 years, and recorded almost everything that happened in his life. Also, David had a lot of bills that he issued to clients for his services, and checks from shops and restaurants. Everything that, according to the detectives, could help in the investigation, was seized and handed over for examination. The first thing that the detectives noticed was envelopes with photos with the Super Snaps logo. During interrogation, David claimed that he had never been in this photo studio. But as it turned out later, he was a regular customer, therefore, he ran into Wendy more than once. The next suspicious detail was the entries in the diary about visiting the Buster Brown's restaurant with checks attached. And there were a lot of them, which means that David was a regular guest of the institution. Although during interrogation he said that he had never been to this restaurant. Another clue was found in printed photos that were found in David's office. On some of them, he was wearing Clark's boots with a peculiar pattern on the sole. It was possible to see this due to the high quality of the photo. The pattern on the boots looked familiar to the detectives, so they compared it to a shoe print found on the cuff of Wendy's blouse. The picture matched. A pair of Clark's boots were also found at David's house. The investigation believes that Wendy and Caroline were not random victims. David frequented Super Snaps and Buster Brown's. Most likely, for some time he tracked down his victims, choosing the right time. The evidence found was added to the David Fuller case, which was soon taken to court. The detectives understood that the evidence they found was not enough to charge David with the murders of Wendy and Caroline. But luck smiled at them. Under pressure, after 6 days, David made a frank confession. It would seem that the case can be closed. The culprit was found after 33 years. This is what would happen if the following happened. All this time, the experts continued to study the materials that were confiscated from David's media. In total, 14 million photos and 4 million videos were found on them. The most shocking of them were stored on hard drives, which David so carefully hid, attached to the back of the nightstand. In the video and photo, David committed sexual acts of violent nature with the bodies of dead people. Some files were signed with names and dates. Judging by the situation, everything happened in the morgue. David, working in the hospital, and had a special pass that allowed him to visit all the premises, including the morgue. Since he maintained all the electrical equipment in the hospital, he knew exactly where the security cameras were located and what areas they covered. At the new Tunbridge Wells Hospital, cadaver refrigerators are installed between 2 rooms, with doors on both sides. Surveillance cameras are installed only in one room, and in the other, where the autopsy is performed, they are not available for ethical reasons. And David knew it. He visited the morgue in the evenings, when there was practically no one left in the hospital. The photos and videos taken by David were disgusting, but the experts were forced to review them. Name tags worn on the toes of corpses often fell into the frame, which allowed the investigation to establish the approximate number of victims and the dates on which the abuses were committed. During a search of David's house, was found a notebook with names of people and nasty details of what he did with them. Experts saw most of the names on the list on the tags when they looked through the creepy photo and video collection. After collecting all the data, the detectives found out that David Fuller began his dirty work in 2008, when he was working at the Kent and Sussex Hospital. Most likely, this nightmare would have continued further, until David would have retired. When Fuller was charged with mutilating corpses, he initially denied involvement and later confessed to 51 episodes. The police were able to identify 102 victims. All of them were female, aged from 9 to 85 years. Detectives believe there could be many more victims. And it's not just about bullying corpses, but also about attacks and disappearances of people. Detectives are investigating unsolved crimes that occurred in the areas where David Fuller lived. In Britain, this case was the largest among all known such crimes. David was nicknamed the Morgue Monster. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Under British law for desecration of a corpse, the maximum penalty is only 2 years in prison. This is exactly the term David would have received for his nasty deeds if his involvement in the murder of Wendy and Caroline had not been proven. David's wife, 50-year-old Mala, was present at the trial. She was horrified when she found out the secrets that her husband was hiding. After the trial, Mala filed for divorce and left the family home with her son. She said she couldn't be there anymore. David Fuller's entourage was shocked by his crimes. No one ever noticed any oddities in his behavior. He was always kind, sympathetic, and sociable. The women with whom David had relationships called him a gentleman. He was very attentive and gallant. He didn't show a tendency to perversion in bed. Consultant forensic psychiatrist Dr. Richard Badcock described David Fuller as an unstable, manipulative personality who is unable to cope with his own problems. Has a penchant for sadomasochism and voyeurism. The latter explains his penetration into other people's houses. Such people are forced to gradually increase the degree of extremeness of their actions in order to feel alive. Unfortunately, this inevitably leads to the commission of murder. According to Dr. Richard, with such a mental disorder, necrophilia is the last line. And David Fuller crossed it.